I never told my daughter I inherited $7 million, and thank God I didn't, because her husband, he was already circling. You ever get that feeling like the air in the room shifts before anything even happens? That's exactly how it felt. We were sitting in my cabin, deep in the woods of Vermont. Snow still clung to the trees outside, and the smell of pine and firewood lingered in the air. I was nursing a cup of Earl Grey, clutching it so tight I thought the ceramic might crack in my hands. Across from me sat my daughter Ellie, still glowing from her wedding just 2 days ago. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes sparkled. She looked happy, so happy. Beside her was her new husband, Daniel. He wore that perfectly tailored smile, the kind that comes too easily like it's been practiced. One arm slung casually around the back of Ellie's chair, like he already owned the space, the story, maybe even the future. Then he slid something across the table, a thick envelope, yellow-sealed formal. He said it like it was no big deal, just future-proofing the family. You know, aligning assets, being smart about the next steps. I didn't touch it, didn't blink. Sweet Ellie nodded along like it made perfect sense. It's just a formality, Mom. Daniel's amazing with finances. We're planning ahead, setting up a trust, in case we have kids. You understand, right? I forced a smile, but my stomach twisted. That envelope had my name on it. Not hers, not theirs, mine. They didn't know. No one did. After my husband died, I quietly inherited $7 million. I didn't tell Ellie, or the bank, or even my closest friend. Instead, I moved the money into a private holding account under a name Ellie had never heard. I told myself it was about privacy, about simplicity. But in that moment, watching Daniel lean back so confident, so prepared, I knew exactly why I'd kept that secret. Because this wasn't about love. This wasn't about planning for kids or building a legacy. This was a play. And Daniel, he wasn't just Ellie's husband. He was a hunter, and I had just felt the first tug of the snare. I didn't open the envelope until after they'd left for their honeymoon. Ellie kissed my cheek, humming as she packed the car. Daniel gave me a wink and a quick, too casual, "Thanks again for everything, Margot." Then they were gone off to the Amalfi Coast to begin what Ellie believed was the first chapter of her forever. And I waited until the snow started falling again, until the cabin was quiet and the tea had gone cold in my cup. Only then did I slide the envelope open with trembling fingers. I already knew it wouldn't be good, but I wasn't prepared for just how calculated it was. Inside was a financial agreement, a family trust integration document, it said, across the top in bold serif font. But what it really was a quiet heist. A proposal worded gently enough to sound benign, that asked me to formally merge a portion of my estate into a newly formed trust. The one Daniel had set up, a trust he would manage. It wasn't a request, it was a strategy. My name had been printed on the first page, over a dozen times. There were pre-filled blanks, places for me to sign. Legal phrases like asset allocation, fiduciary authority, and provisional disbursement structure littered every paragraph like little landmines dressed in velvet. And yet Daniel had delivered it with that smooth grin, that polished charm, like he was offering me a recipe card, not a legally binding path to losing everything I'd worked for. I sat there at the kitchen table, the same place where I once taught Ellie how to braid challah dough, my heart tightening with a sick familiarity. Because I had seen this before. Different name, different smile, same predator. My late husband's brother had tried something similar after the funeral. He'd come in with warmth condolences offers to help with the transition. He left with a lawsuit and a bruised ego when I caught the fine print buried in a sympathy letter. No, I wasn't going to let this happen again. Not to me, not to Ellie. But I also knew I couldn't just react. If I confronted Daniel now, he'd pivot, reframe, make me look paranoid, controlling, bitter. And Ellie, she'd defend him. She was in love. Love softens the eyes and dulls the ears. So I picked up the phone and called the one person I trusted to see the angles I couldn't. Jules. I said when he answered, I need your help. He didn't ask why. He just listened. I explained the contract, the timing, the tone, the name of the trust Ellison Hastings Family Legacy Fund, like I was already history. He let out a low whistle. And you haven't told Ellie about the inheritance, right? No one knows, I said. $7 million, every last cent untouched. But now I think Daniel suspects something. There was a pause on the line. You want me to fight this? No, I said slowly. Not yet. I want you to build a story. One he'll believe. A decoy. Something believable. Something unimpressive. We spent hours that night crafting it. A legal-looking inheritance disclosure stating that I'd received $240,000 from my late husband's estate. Modest, tidy, and just boring enough to be ignored. Jules created a mock bank transfer trail to a small account in my name. We gave it dates, routing numbers, even a scanned check stub for flair. Make it easy to find, I told him, but not too easy. You think he'll bite? Jules asked. I think he's already hungry, I replied. I printed the file on heavyweight paper and tucked it in a manila folder. Then I left it out right on the edge of my desk, barely concealed beneath some outdated tax forms. It was bait, the first trap, and if Daniel was what I thought he was, he wouldn't be able to resist it. Not when the scent of money was in the air. 3 days. That's all it took. 3 days after I laid the bait, the wolves came knocking. It was just past 9 a.m. The woods outside were silent except for the distant crack of frozen branches in the cold. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when I heard the knock, 3 sharp, deliberate taps. I opened the door to find a young man standing in a navy overcoat, so sharply tailored it could have cut glass. He held a briefcase in one hand, the other already extended toward me. Mrs. Whitmore, he asked. I didn't answer. I just looked him up and down. My name is Benjamin Rowe. He continued smoothly. I represent Daniel Hastings and Ellie Hastings regarding an urgent financial matter. The name stopped me cold. Ellie Hastings. My daughter hadn't changed her last name, not legally, not socially. That detail wasn't just wrong, it was presumptive, offensive even. But Benjamin didn't flinch. May I come in? It won't take long. Everything in me screamed to shut the door. But curiosity, no strategy won out. I stepped aside. He entered like he belonged there, like the room had been waiting for him. He placed his briefcase on the very same dining table where Ellie used to do her school projects, where she once built a papier-mâché volcano and proudly made it erupt with vinegar and red dye. Now a stranger was standing over it, ready to detonate something else entirely. This, he said, pulling out a crisp packet of documents, is what we're calling a precautionary addendum. Daniel and Ellie are in the process of aligning their financial portfolios and future planning structures. I didn't sit. I crossed my arms and stared. He continued undeterred. We simply need your signature to confirm participation in the Ellison Hastings Family Trust. Olivia signed this copy yesterday before they left for the Amalfi Coast. He slid it toward me. I didn't even glance at it. Instead, I said, "Cut the fluff. Show me the section about the money." Benjamin blinked, then flipped the document open, finding the page with mechanical precision. Section 7.2, he said. Parental estate disclosures and pre-inheritance trust structures. He paused. This is a standard clause. I stepped closer. In plain English, Mr. Rowe. He cleared his throat. We're requesting a declaration of any significant assets or expected inheritance that may factor into the trust's equitable distribution model. In other words, they were asking what I was hiding and how much of it they could touch. I let the silence hang heavy before replying, "You're asking me to confess my secrets to a stranger, on behalf of someone who just joined this family 5 minutes ago." Benjamin smiled tightly. "This protects everyone involved, ma'am, especially with the economy the way it is." I tapped a fingernail on the table. Did Ellie even read this? Another pause, another flicker. "They trust each other," he said carefully. That's what marriage is built on. Wrong answer. I stepped forward, palms flat against the wood between us. You can tell Daniel he'll have to wait. I don't sign anything unless it's reviewed by my legal team. That surprised him, just for a moment. But he recovered quickly, slipping the document back into his briefcase like it didn't sting. Understood. May I ask when we might expect your response? You'll have it, I said. When I decide to give it. He nodded, polite, maybe even a little shaken. Then he left. As the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It had begun. They were circling, but they weren't ready for what they were walking into. They were looking for buried treasure. They just didn't know. The map was fake, and the real fortune already locked away in a place they'd never find. After Benjamin left, I didn't waste time. I called Jules that afternoon. His voice was calm, steady, exactly what I needed. They've moved too early, I said, pacing the hallway. Daniel didn't even wait a week. You want to respond? He asked. No, I want to bait. There was a pause on the line, then a quiet hum of understanding. You want me to build the illusion, he said. Exactly. I want something that looks real, but just unimpressive enough to be ignored. Over the next 48 hours, Jules and I built a mirage. He drafted bank documents carefully aged and formatted to match my old accounts. A modest sum $240,000 was positioned as my total inheritance from Charles, my late husband, just enough to seem like a final whittled-down estate after taxes, debts, and funeral expenses. Something that might sustain a quiet life in the Vermont woods, but not enough to spark greed. We added a false transfer record to a small regional bank in New Hampshire, one that doesn't exist anymore under its original name, which added just enough authenticity. Jules even mocked up an old check stub and a printed email confirming a closed trust account. Then came the most delicate part, leaving the evidence out. I didn't stash it away in a safe or shredder like a cautious woman would. No, I displayed it, softly, carelessly. I printed everything and placed it inside a manila folder labeled 2021 Inheritance Docs. I left it half tucked beneath some utility bills on my home office desk, just enough to be visible, just enough to tempt. If Daniel or someone acting for him was already sniffing, I needed to know how deep the rot went. And then I waited. 2 days passed. Silence. On the third day I got the call. It was my banker Emily, someone I'd known since she was an intern straight out of college. Margot, she said, her voice tight, we flagged a login attempt on your dormant joint account, the one ending in 3972. I felt the hairs rise on my arms. That account hasn't been touched in years, I said quietly. I know, she replied, but someone just tried to initiate an access request using your maiden name, full credentials. It triggered our fraud detection. The room tilted slightly. Only 2 people in this world ever knew I had that account under my old name, my husband and Ellie. I stood still for a long moment, the silence in the cabin pressing in around me. Could Ellie have said something offhandedly in a moment of trust or excitement? Or worse, had Daniel found something in her files? Her devices, either way. One thing was now painfully clear. The hunt had begun. Daniel wasn't guessing anymore. He was digging. And if he was willing to go after accounts I hadn't touched in over a decade, he wasn't just playing around the edges. He was inside the walls now. I thanked Emily and hung up, then sat at my desk staring at the open decoy folder like it was a detonator. He believed it, at least enough to try. But what chilled me more wasn't the fraud attempt, it was the method. He hadn't used his own name, he'd used mine, which meant he was willing to impersonate to cross lines not later, but now. So early in the marriage, so early in the game. And what terrified me most, he was doing it with Ellie, sleeping beside him. I knew I had to see them face to face, not in my home, not on my ground, someplace neutral, but familiar. So I chose the Old Orchard Cafe, Carter and Finch, just outside town. The same place Ellie and I used to visit every autumn when she was little. We'd pick apples, sip hot cider on the wooden porch, and laugh until our cheeks hurt. That place was full of memories, pure ones. Maybe just maybe it would help her see what was still real. I reserved a quiet table in the corner garden room, roses out the window, soft jazz humming in the background. Nothing flashy, just intimate. I brought Jules along, of course, but not as my lawyer. That would have spooked Daniel. Instead, he arrived in a soft blue sweater, clean-shaven, smiling like an old family friend, catching up over soup. The notary I'd arranged sat at another table nearby, sipping espresso clipboard tucked under his coat. Just in case. They arrived on time. Ellie looked radiant but nervous, her eyes scanning the space like she wasn't sure what kind of conversation she'd just walked into. Daniel, on the other hand, strolled in like he was about to pitch a business deal on Shark Tank. Powder blue blazer, no tie. That smile polished to a shine. Mom Ellie said softly, leaning in for a kiss on the cheek. "You look beautiful," I told her. Daniel shook Jules's hand confidently. "Nice to meet you. You've known Margot long." Since before Ellie was born, Jules replied with just enough warmth to feel true. We ordered salad for Ellie, steak for Daniel, soup for me. Small talk floated across the table. Weather wedding photos missed luggage from their flight. Then, like clockwork, Daniel leaned forward and pulled a folder from his satchel. "I brought the paperwork again," he said, like it was an afterthought. "Figured you might have had time to think it over." He laid it gently on the table between us. I nodded slowly. "I did, actually." I reached into my own handbag and retrieved a folder, smaller, simpler, slightly creased at the edge like I hadn't obsessed over it at all. I placed it next to his. "This is my inheritance disclosure," I said, calm and clear. $240,000 after debts and legal fees. Modest, but it's all that's left. Daniel didn't touch the paper, but his face changed, just a flicker, a half-second freeze. His mouth twitched like he'd bitten into something that tasted wrong. Too small, too simple, not worth the effort. "Ah," he said, finally smiling. "That makes sense. Estate taxes can be brutal." Ellie looked between us, her brow furrowing. "Wait, I thought Dad left more." I turned to her gently. "He did. But I didn't want to burden you with all the details back then. There were debts, old business obligations. I've managed okay, but it's not a fortune." She nodded slowly, but something shifted in her eyes. Not doubt, not yet, but a ripple. Daniel picked up his water glass, swirling it like he needed something to do with his hands. "Totally understandable," he said, voice thinner now. I smiled politely. "After this lunch, I'm rolling what's left into a small annuity for retirement. Nothing fancy, but it'll last me." He gave a short laugh. "Of course. Smart." Jules said nothing, but I could feel him watching every muscle in Daniel's face. The lunch ended with pleasantries and a long hug from Ellie. But as they walked away, Daniel's arm around her shoulder, I noticed the slight stiffness in her stride, the way she glanced back at me, just once. The seed had been planted, and I had a feeling it was going to grow faster than he expected. That night, long after the plates were cleared and the echo of forced laughter faded from the Orchard Cafe, I was back in my cabin alone, staring at the moonlit pines outside my window when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank, not a routine balance update. This one had red lettering, "Urgent suspicious withdrawal attempt, flag transaction on account 4227. My heart stilled. That was the decoy account. The one Jules and I had built into the perfect illusion, complete with modest funds, false deposit dates, and a fabricated inheritance trail. It wasn't connected to anything real, not the trust, not the estate, just paper and pixels. And yet, someone had tried to take all of it. $240,000. Every penny. I tapped into the bank's fraud report. The device ID used to access the account was unfamiliar, but the bank had already tracked its origin, logged in from a 5-star resort in Ravello, Italy, the honeymoon suite, and the device and iPad registered to Ellie. I set my phone down slowly, my hand trembling, not from fear, but from fury. Daniel had taken the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. He saw the number, believed it, moved on it. He wasn't waiting for a conversation, wasn't waiting for consent, wasn't even being cautious. No, he was sure enough to act without hesitation, sure enough to treat Ellie's tablet like his own, sure enough to believe I was naive enough to leave money lying unguarded. But what struck me deeper than the theft attempt was the method. It wasn't just greed anymore, it was invasion. He had access to her device, her logins, her digital footprint. That meant one of two things. Either she handed over her passwords willingly out of blind trust, or he found them on his own, snooping in stalling trackers, hiding his intentions beneath tenderness. I couldn't decide which possibility hurt more. I didn't call Ellie, not yet, because no matter how much I wanted to scream, he tried to steal from me she wouldn't hear it. Not the way I needed her to. Not when she was still wrapped in the haze of post-wedding euphoria, sun-kissed from the Amalfi Coast, sleeping beside the man she believed loved her. And part of me wasn't ready to know which truth was worse, that she didn't see it coming, or that she did and let it happen anyway. I walked the house that night in silence, room to room, checking windows I'd locked 100 times before, peeking behind curtains, opening drawers like some phantom might have left a trace. Everything looked normal, untouched, and yet I felt breached, not just as a mother, but as a woman who'd survived betrayal once before and promised herself she never would again. At 2:17 a.m., I sat in my leather armchair in the study, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the fire as it burned down to embers. The folder with the fake inheritance lay open on the desk. Empty, now emptier somehow than it had been before. The game had shifted. I wasn't just guarding my money anymore. I was guarding my daughter's future, her safety, her dignity. And if I didn't act soon, Daniel wasn't just going to take her savings or her signature. He was going to take everything. She came the next afternoon. No text, no warning, just the sound of tires crunching gravel and a flash of her silver car pulling up the winding driveway. I saw her from the kitchen window, Ellie, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched, stepping out of the car with the storm already brewing in her eyes. I opened the door before she could knock. She didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She stood there on the porch, shivering slightly, not from the cold, but from something sharper. "Daniel said you threatened him," she blurted, voice brittle, accusing. "He said you cornered him over lunch and humiliated him." I took a deep breath, stepping aside. "Come in, Ellie." She hesitated, just long enough for her pride to flare. Then she stepped over the threshold like she was crossing into enemy territory. We sat at the same kitchen table where she'd once sat in her pajamas, eating apple slices and peanut butter before school. Now she sat across from me, arms folded, chin trembling. But her eyes were filled with fire and hurt. I didn't try to comfort her. I didn't offer tea. I just looked at her and said quietly, "He tried to access an account in my name from your tablet, the same account connected to the $240,000 figure in the document I gave him." She blinked, confused, then angry. "What are you talking about?" "I left a fake document," I said, plainly. "It wasn't real. It was bait. He believed it and tried to take it." Ellie shook her head. You set him up?" I nodded slowly. I protected myself, and I hoped I'd be wrong. But I wasn't. She pushed her chair back abruptly, standing. "You're spying on us. You created fake bank accounts to trap my husband. You went through my tablet." "No," I said, still calm. "But he did." Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hands trembled. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "You've always been controlling, but this is insane. I was trying to protect you." From what she cried. From love, from trusting someone, from building something that you didn't choose for me. Her voice cracked, and her eyes welled with tears. "Why do you always do this? Why do you always expect the worst?" "Because," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, "I've lived through the worst." She looked away, breathing hard, arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Then she grabbed her coat, her keys, her dignity, and turned for the door. "Ellie," I said, standing, "please." But she was already walking fast, stumbling slightly as she opened the door. "You didn't even trust me to choose someone good," she said, tears streaking her cheeks. "And maybe you're right. Maybe he's not. But this is not how you help someone." And then she was gone. The door slammed shut behind her and silence swallowed the room. I stood there, hand on the back of her empty chair, heart pounding in my chest. The trap had sprung, but not on Daniel. On me. I had lost her, at least for now. And as much as I wanted to tell myself this was necessary, that she'd thank me later, that truth always rises. It didn't stop the ache. Because sometimes when you try to protect the people you love, you become the very thing they think they need protecting from. The silence after Ellie left felt different this time. Not peaceful, not even lonely. It was the kind of silence that hums with questions about what you could have said, should have said, or maybe shouldn't have done at all. But it didn't last, because I still had one card left to play. That night I called Jules. "She's not listening to me," I told him, voice hoarse, from holding in too much. "But she might listen to him." "You mean, in his own words?" he asked. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I need you to help me find it." The moment he dropped the mask. We spent the next few hours combing through every bit of wedding footage I had. Not just the professional reel, but shaky clips from guests' Instagram stories, live streams, and texts Ellie had sent me weeks ago without even thinking. There were toasts, dancing, laughter, so much laughter. And then, there it was, a clip 31 seconds long filmed by one of Daniel's groomsmen. The camera angle was slightly off, the lighting dim, but the audio was clear enough. Daniel, drink in hand, sleeves rolled up, stood surrounded by his old college buddies. One of them asked, joking casual, "So what's next, man? You married rich?" And Daniel, without skipping a beat, without hesitation, grinned that arrogant, hollow smile and replied, "Not yet, but give me a month." They all laughed. He raised his glass like he'd just sealed the deal of his life. I paused the video, the image frozen on his smug expression. My breath caught in my throat. There it was. Proof. Not a paper trail, not a transaction log, not speculation. His own words, his own voice. Arrogant, confident, careless. "I've got it," I said quietly to Jules, "and I know what to do with it." He didn't have to ask. He knew me well enough by now. I transferred the clip to a USB drive, one I kept in the drawer, with Ellie's baby photos and birthday cards, like some cruel twist of fate, and got in my car. It was late, close to midnight, when I pulled up outside their building. The luxury condo downtown looked as polished and sterile as Daniel himself. High glass walls, coated entry, no warmth. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I walked to the mailbox bank under the flickering porch light, found their unit, and slipped the USB inside. That was it. No note, no explanation, just the truth waiting to be opened. And I didn't wait for thanks, didn't need validation, because I wasn't hoping to be proven right anymore. I was hoping she'd finally see. The man she had married wasn't just flawed. He was calculated. And now she had the one thing I couldn't give her through words, his own voice boasting about the prize he thought he'd won. I drove home slowly, the roads empty, the sky low and heavy with the scent of snow. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel frantic. I just felt still, because I had delivered the truth in the only language Daniel understood. Now, I just had to wait for the storm to break. It was raining the morning she came back, not just a drizzle, real rain, heavy, soaking, cleansing, the kind that drums against the windows and makes the trees bow a little in surrender. I heard the car before I saw it, the tires swishing up the gravel driveway, then a door slamming, then footsteps fast, uneven, coming up the porch. By the time I opened the door, she was already reaching for it. Ellie, tear-streaked, trembling, rain clinging to her hair like pieces of a shattered dream. She didn't say a word, just walked into the house like she was escaping a fire. And in a way, she was. She sat down at the kitchen table, soaking wet hands balled into fists on her lap. She didn't look at me. I watched it, she whispered. The video. I pulled out a towel, gently placed it around her shoulders. Still she wouldn't meet my eyes. He laughed, she said, like it was funny, like I was the joke. My throat tightened. She took a shaky breath. I checked his iPad after that. His browser history, dozens of searches, how to access a trust fund without permission, inheritance loopholes, power of attorney over spouse. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. He told me I was paranoid, she said you were twisting things. But then last night, he got angry, really angry. He said if I tried to leave him, he'd sue me for fraud. What I said, stepping closer. She nodded, swallowing hard. He said he has a prenup, that I signed it, that my name is on all the wedding bills, that I used his money for everything. I knelt beside her. Ellie, you didn't do anything wrong. I don't even remember signing it, she said, her voice cracking. He said I did it the night before the wedding, that it's all official. Her whole body shook. What if he's right? What if he ruins me? I reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. We're going to fix this, I said softly. Together. Her eyes finally met mine, broken wide, searching for something to hold on to. I'm so sorry, Mom. I wrapped my arms around her, and she sobbed deep, guttural sobs like grief had finally found a way out. I held her like I used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms, when she would curl against my chest, safe from monsters that lived only in shadows. But this one was real, and it wore a wedding ring. You didn't do anything wrong, I repeated. You believed in love. That's not weakness. But I was blind, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I didn't listen to you. I let him come between us. No, sweetheart. He tried to come between us. But you came home. That's what matters. We sat there in silence for a long while. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one we were still in the middle of. But in that moment, I knew we had crossed the first bridge. She saw him now, not the version he sold her, but the man behind the smile. And as painful as that was, it was also the beginning. Because when the illusion breaks, when love is stripped of lies and control, and contracts, what remains is choice. And now, finally, Ellie had hers back. We chose a glass-walled attorney's office downtown. Clean, quiet, modern, exactly the kind of place that made people behave better than they felt. Cameras on every corner, neutral ground, no shouting, no hiding. Jules was already there when we arrived, seated calmly at the end of the long walnut table, a slim black folder resting in front of him like a silent grenade. I glanced at Ellie. She looked pale but composed. Her jaw was set, her fingers laced tightly in her lap, knuckles white. I had told her she didn't have to come, but she insisted. I need to see his face, she said when he realizes I'm done. And then he walked in. Daniel, wearing a sleek black turtleneck and designer sunglasses indoors, like he was auditioning for a role no one had cast him in. He smiled when he saw us. That same old rehearsed grin like this was just a misunderstanding waiting to be charmed away. But the smile faltered the moment Jules slid the folder across the table. What's this? Daniel asked, still cocky. Jules opened it slowly. A courtesy copy of our findings. Daniel flipped through the first page, then the second. By the third, I saw it, that flicker, the shift. His posture stiffened, his jaw clenched just slightly. We had him. Inside that folder was a carefully curated timeline, IP logs from the failed login on my decoy account, screenshots of browser history from Ellie's tablet, metadata from the wedding footage, and most damning of all, a still from the video, Daniel mid-laugh, glass raised, bragging to his friends, "Not yet, but give me a month." He shut the folder. "There's no crime here," he said quickly. "You can't prove anything." "You're right," Jules replied calmly. "There's no crime yet. But we've got enough to raise red flags with half a dozen investigators, fraudulent access, digital impersonation, coercive signatures on a prenup she doesn't remember signing." Daniel scoffed. You think this will hold up in court? I leaned forward, voice quiet. Steady. We're not taking it to court. He blinked. I slid a single-page document across the table. You're going to walk away. Clean. Sign this annulment, forfeit all shared assets, accounts, and property. No fight, no headlines. He stared at it. And if I don't, he asked, voice sharp now. Jules opened his phone, tapped once. I've got a reporter on standby, he said. One email, and your name is splashed across every finance blog and legal podcast in the country. The man who married into millions then tried to siphon it from his wife's mother using her own daughter's tablet. You can't blackmail me, Daniel hissed. This isn't blackmail, I said evenly. It's exposure. You wrote the story. We're just choosing the ending. He looked at Ellie. For a moment, I saw him try one last thing, the soft eyes, the half smile, the tiny tilt of his head. But she didn't flinch. She just said, We're done, Daniel. And something in his face broke. He picked up the pen, signed every page, then stood, folded the document, and slipped it into his bag. No words, no apology, not even a glance back. He walked out, alone. When the door clicked shut, Ellie let out a breath like she hadn't exhaled in weeks. I reached across the table and took her hand. She gripped it tightly, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen since before the wedding piece. The moment the door closed behind Daniel, Ellie collapsed into my arms. I didn't believe you, she whispered, her voice, small, raw. Not when it mattered. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. I just held her tighter, as if I could wrap my arms around the entire ache of the last few weeks and keep it from sinking any deeper into her chest. We left the law office in silence. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft gold across the city sidewalks. Neither of us spoke on the drive home. Words felt too heavy. But the silence this time, it wasn't sharp. It was soft, like a pause between heartbeats. That night we didn't do anything fancy. No champagne, no celebration, just grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food from simpler days. Ellie sat at the kitchen table, legs tucked under her like she used to do when she was 16, heartbroken over a high school breakup and pretending not to cry into her cereal. She stirred her soup slowly, then asked, Was it real? I looked up. She met my gaze. The 7 million, she clarified. Was it real? I nodded. Quietly. Gently. It was. Her eyes widened just slightly, but she didn't react the way I expected. No shock, no greed, just a slow breath. Why didn't you tell me, she asked. I set my spoon down. Because I didn't just want to protect the money, I wanted to protect you. From what it does to people, from how it changes conversations, expectations, relationships. She nodded slowly, then reached across the table and took my hand. No more secrets, she said. I squeezed her fingers. No more secrets, I echoed. We didn't say much else after that, just ate quietly, comfortably. The fire crackled in the corner. The kitchen lights cast a warm glow over the room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it felt like home again. Not a battlefield, not a vault, not a trap, just home. We weren't the same women we were before this began. She wasn't just my daughter, and I wasn't just her mother. We were survivors, wounded, wiser, and finally whole. After watching Margot's story unfold, I can't stop thinking about how many women, mothers, daughters, wives, are taught to confuse silence with grace and suspicion with paranoia. We're told to trust for the sake of harmony, to comply for the sake of love. But trust without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. Daniel didn't just try to steal money, he tried to rewrite legacy, to control, to erase, to manipulate. And he nearly succeeded, not because he was clever, but because he counted on Margot staying quiet and Ellie staying blind. This isn't just a cautionary tale about inheritance or marriage, it's about agency, about knowing the value of what you've built and defending it even if it means being called cold, bitter, or worse. Margot wasn't cruel, she was clear, and that clarity saved them both. We need to teach our daughters that protection doesn't mean control, that asking questions isn't distrust, it's self-respect. That love should never come with contracts buried in charm. So here's my question to you. Have you ever silenced your instincts for the sake of peace, or overlooked a red flag because you didn't want to seem dramatic? Let's talk about it in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not sign the paper, and sometimes the most radical act of love is saying, "No, I'd love to hear your story."